repeated a few times, but on the horizon, the sky, etc., it's really only used once or twice.
Wow. And you
And
said
I
that,
do spend a lot. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, you mentioned sometimes making a little sample, a little pot holder almost, you said.
Well, the pot holders are sort of how I get to recognize fabrics and figure out what they could do. They're not really samplers. They're what I do when I get stuck. It's what I do. I do a number of fine craft shows because I decided my emphasis was going to be making and selling the quilts, which means I've got to figure out how to sell the quilts, which means I've got to have something people will want to buy. And it lets me play with the colors, the fabrics. Sometimes it justifies buying a fabric I couldn't use in a quilt. So
Mhm.
that's why I do those.
Someone asked if the fabrics are cut on the bias.
No,
No.
they're cut with the fabric as a wedge. So there's a very slight bias. If you work true bias, it becomes too wonky.
Mhm, mhm. And then someone else asked, do you sketch on the batting so you know what line to follow?
I will sometimes sketch a hint as to what I'm doing, yes.
Something I noticed when looking at your work on your website, is it's very distinctive how you get these shapes, these masses of color. And if some people have heard of, gosh, now I can't think of the artist's name, Homage to the Square. But, there's like, it also makes me think a little bit of the fad I was part of too, of color wash quilts. I mean, they are very different. How you achieve these shapes, not with a block or with patchwork, but just with concentration of values or hues of a particular fabric. And your work's very different from that look of those quilts, but there's sort of the same thing going on here. And it's marvelous, the imagery that you achieve just by blending these fabrics.
Actually, at one point, when I was playing with colors and fabrics, before color wash quilts came out, when color wash quilts came out, everybody assumed they were color wash, and it just took away my market like that. I had to rethink what I was doing, which is fine.
Well, I strongly encourage everyone, if you haven't seen Anne's quilts before or Sujata's, to go out and just Google their name and then look at images and see, or go to their websites and see their work, because this is just a tiny little fraction of what they do, and their work is, both of them, is just stunning. So
I was going to have ask a question of you, Lindsay, and then we'll also hear from our artists again too. But I think everybody would be interested to know is, how do you put together an exhibit like this? And I do know from the fact that I'm involved with the museum that if you're going to curate an exhibit, you need to know quite a while in advance so that your search takes months. And I'm sure, tell us a little bit about the process for this.
well, my first two exhibits that I curated that you mentioned, the Art Quilts of the Midwest and Feed Sacks, I had written books on both of those topics. And Art Quilts of the Midwest basically turned into it was a catalog. We used every piece in that book, including, and we hung some from the ceiling. It was very exciting figuring out how to hang that show. But this one was a little different because I did not have a book to go from. I mentioned that Roderick Kirikoff was sort of one of my starting places, where I knew he had a number of string piece quilts, wonderful vintage quilts. And so I contacted him and we talked about the quilts. And I think there are maybe 10 of the quilts in the show, I believe, are from his collection. So that was a starting point for me. And then, because I'm a writer, I've written books, and I also have written for all kinds of publications, Uppercase Magazine, and American Patchwork and Quilting, and Quilt Sampler. So I have gotten to know over the years, and I've done that for probably 15 years, that I've gotten to know a lot of people in the industry, or who just are quilters, or so I kind of kept my eye out. And I also think, social media actually, again, I kind of follow people whose work I think is fabulous. And some of those people were string quilters. I belong to the American Quilt Study Group, AQSG, and they have a really active, super active, I was just looking today, Facebook page where they'll pick topics, and then everyone who collects these quilts will post pictures or just collects even pictures of these quilts of the kind of quilt. So that was very helpful to me in looking at, and I found some of the quilts there. So it really just was a variety of places. And what I did was I started thinking about, and Tara's quilts, for example, I saw at QuiltCon, you know, so all kinds of places. And I think what I just did was, again, tried to have as much variety in terms of, wow, look what this amazing, tiny, simple little technique can create. You know, it's people are so creative with this, well, with many techniques, but with this technique in particular. I mean, if you look at Sujata's quilt and Anne's quilt and look how different they are and how both are so incredible. And that's, you know, just a little slice of the pie. So that was one of my goals, was to try and have a wide range of the techniques that, or settings that you find with string piecing. So that's a little, and you're right, I had to get going far ahead. And of course, you know, in my typical fashion, right at the end, I was, you know, some of the quilters I wanted, either the quilts wouldn't be available or one person didn't want to include her quilts, which I was very sad about, but, you know, so then I had to find someone else. But, you know, the other thing too about having known people this long is that you start talking to people and they give you suggestions. Oh, you should talk to so-and-so. Oh, you should talk
One
to
thing leads to another.
right.
Yeah. And kind of interesting as we're living in these pandemic times that Lindsay lives 2.5 hours from Winterset over in Iowa City. And of course, she was here for Art Quilts of the Midwest to install that, to bring her expertise to it and her aesthetic. Same with feed sacks, but she did not come to Winterset for the installation. So Megan and Randall hung the show, but Lindsay and Paul did come a couple weeks ago and took a look at the exhibit, so she got to see it in person. I have a question for Anne. If there are no other questions, Lindsay, I'm kind of counting on you to look at the questions in the chat.
Yep, I've got
But
my
you know, there was we had someone in our home recently that was working on the furnaces, and he came through my studio, and of course he's wearing a shield and a mask and everything. And he says, "Oh, you're a quilter. Do you sell your quilts?" And I had to answer no, but fortunately I ran up to the quilt museum and took pictures of the quilts and for sale in our gift shop, and then he gave me his credit card and I came and bought a quilt for him. But Anne, you do sell your work, and we can ask Sujata the same thing. And so you've made a living as making and selling quilts, which I know is no mean feat. So could you tell us a little bit, I mean, what is the price range of your quilts? What types of people do purchase your quilts? Are there repeat purchasers and so forth? I think it'd be so interesting to hear about that.
It's a lot of different people. I sell right now, I'm forced to sell online a lot, which is fine. Normally I would do a number of fine craft shows to introduce my work to a bunch of people. And because I've been doing it for a long time, people know of my work. So I never know when I open up my email what's going to be there, what people want, etc. You know, some are people who've been longing for my quilt for years. And finally, they have the right occasion. You know, I just finished a quilt. Her daughter was getting married in her grand room, and she wanted to redecorate in honor of that. You know, so I made the quilt to go with the space, incorporating the colors of the grand room. Some of the quilts are people who just see it and fall in love. Some of them are repeat customers. You know, I get people who say, I have 4 or 5 of your quilts hanging in different places. I do make a selection of smaller items, partly. It keeps me in my booth when I'm doing a craft show, but also it allows people to appreciate my work. In fact, my best commission was for the Federal District Courthouse down in Springfield. They had designed a wall, actually 4 walls, 4 quilts. It was 160 feet of quilts. And I got the commission because a curator had come through my studio, purchased one of my tiniest pieces, gave me a museum show. As a result of that, the judges for the courthouse said, this is what we want from Western Mass. And that's how I got this wonderful commission. You know, so I just don't know. I listen. Some people, it's not for me. I'm not for them. I have my limits as to what I do. Other people allow me to work and see what's happening. I can change colors, not change colors. Do I have the right one they want? Whatever. So I'm always out there. During the pandemic, I realized that what people needed was a sense that there's something beyond this pandemic. So after making my one sad quilt, I said, no, people need to dream about the future. And I started making a whole series of dreams about the future. Tomorrow's another day, very happy quilts, which was lovely and fun.
Fascinating. That's so interesting. Now, Sujata, you are a professional quilter too. You teach classes. Do you sell your work, or tell us more? I think people listening find it interesting. I'm sure many of them are quilt hobbyists, we might say. They're making quilts for themselves, for their pleasure. And so I think it's interesting to hear how someone who is their life work. Tell us a little bit about you on that subject.
So, interestingly enough, I have never really thought about selling my quilts, and that is primarily for one and only one reason: is I mostly do a lot of hand quilting on my quilts, and the time that goes into it, I really can never figure out the amount that that quilt would sell for. So initially, it started out as my lack of knowledge of machine quilting. Basically, I just didn't know how to machine quilt. And before that, it was the machine that I owned. Didn't do a lot of machine quilting. And so I just said, okay, I'm just gonna, because at some point you do have to finish your quilts. You can't just keep making quilt tops. And so since machine quilting did not work for me, I started hand quilting. And then I got into the quilts of G's Bend, and I figured out that that's just a very different approach to quilting in general, starting from the fabrics to the design of it and to finish. And again, I wanted to hand quilt all of them. And so I think that's primarily the reason I have decided that I'm just going to make quilts for myself. And lately, because they have becoming more and more personal, I don't really have the heart to sell them. So, and the idea of all these ideas of, working with new technique and presenting new way of quilting, I've decided teaching is the best way to go for me. And I love when people get excited. During the pandemic, I honestly did not know anything about teaching online. My sister had been asking me to try, at least for the last 5 years, that you should start teaching online and put your lessons on YouTube and whatnot. None of that happened. But last year, at some point, a really good friend of mine, she said, how about you just do a trial lesson and I will help you out and see where it takes you. And that's how I decided to teach online. And I've been teaching for the last 6 months. And everything what Anne said is true. We need to look forward. We need to do something. We needed to do something during this time. At first, I thought, is it taking advantage of the situation? But then quickly changing to no, I needed that. I needed that for the last couple of years for whatever reason. I had stopped teaching and I needed that for myself. And so I presented my very first class on Zoom, and it sold out in less than 2 hours. And then it happened again. And I said, okay, because this allows me to talk about the city communities, the African diaspora of India, which is also part of my goal to bring focus to their lives and their stories. There's a foundation that helps them to make quilts and then sell them. So it really helps them. So I'm doing this not only, of course, for myself, because I am also selling tickets so that I can make money, but I want to shed light on their lives also. So that seems to work for me right now. And someday maybe I'll start selling my quilts, but I'm not there yet. I do get asked question, how many quilts are you going to make? And what do you do with all these quilts? I'm like, well, anybody who comes to our house, they get to be wrapped up in a quilt, when they sleep at night. So I like that.
Well, here's an idea to put in the back of your mind. I never sold my quilts. When Liz Porter and I were teaching, we used them as teaching samples and they were published and so forth. But then as I wound down my career, I've given more quilts away to friends. And but when people ask me, and you might use this line when people say, do you sell your quilt? You can say, if I love you, it's free. Otherwise,
Right.
it's $10,000. So
That's exactly right. And I do make quilts for fundraisers and all that. I mean, I have done that all throughout my life. And if my friends in need, I've done that. But it's the just the idea of like this particular quilt, for instance, it is now so meaningful just by the name of it that I feel like, do I want to sell that? I probably don't. So I think I just am a very emotional, personal quilter, but I would want to do that at some point in future, for sure. Yeah.
But I think there are certain quilts I could not part with.
Right.
There's certain ones that just I can't. What about you, Anne? Are there certain works of yours that you hang on to and that you just would find it hard? I mean, you got to put the bread on the table with your quilts. So so do you have some that you're retained?
No. I think there was a great line. I don't remember. I think it's from Alice B. Toklas, where basically the gist of it was, if her uncle hadn't died, so-and-so would not have been born. And I always think every quilt has its home. It has the place it wants to be. If it makes that person happy, even though I can regret it, why, it can go. Occasionally I sell a quilt too soon when I've not learned everything about the quilt I wanted to absorb. I am lucky because I work in half my studio and the rest of it is a gallery. So I can hang up the quilts that I finished and look at them, absorb them, and move on to the next one. And occasionally they sell just like that, and I'm not done, but hey, it is money, it is more fabric.
I have a
And
question.
that's a great that's a great thought. I'm going to keep that in mind. What Anne just said, if the uncle hadn't died, so and so would be. I think it kind of pushes you forward. I like that. Thank you.
So we have some questions, Lindsay?
Yeah, there are a few questions. Sujata, someone just wrote, Sujata mentions just Shata type of quilting. I'm sure this isn't spelled correctly, but she wanted to know what that is so that she could research it more.
Kantha, Kantha, Kantha style quilting. It's running stitch. I should have those links with me right now, but if you go online, you will find lots of information on Kantha stitching.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's another question, but also meanwhile, if both of our guests today, if you could type your website address in the chat. I'm afraid I'll mess something up if I try to do that. But Megan would be doing all these things because she.
So while you're doing that, Anne, I have a question for you too, but there was a question for me, so I'll answer it while you're typing your things in. The question for me was, Lindsay, are you also thinking about the visual cohesion of the exhibit as you select the quilts? And the answer would be yes. And I was very nervous in this particular exhibit, especially because string piece quilts by their nature are extremely busy. And I really worried that it would just be like too much, all of these string piece quilts. But there, two things to say about that. One is that people who hung the exhibit, Megan and Randall, did an incredible job. It does not look too busy. And the second thing is that the museum itself, the building is it has these big high ceilings, and the walls are very large. And so there was plenty of space to put these quilts in ways that they did not impinge upon each other. So it was not anything that I had to worry about, even though I did worry about it. And I do think about that. So that was my question.
Interestingly, for those who haven't been here, we just have one big gallery, and then we have a mezzanine, which is a floor between two floors. And then when this building was J.C. Penney's for 70 years, when my children were small, the children's department was on that mezzanine. There now we have a bed with quilts to turn, but we mentioned that our walls are movable, our 5 smaller walls, and then we have big walls on the side that Lindsay was talking about. But since the pandemic, the yoga class, the local yoga teacher holds yoga classes here in the museum. So I don't know if you know this or not, Lindsay, but when Megan planned this particular layout for your show, she made it so that the yoga students could move the walls out of the way, as I know because I come to yoga class, and we've kept them unlocked rather than locking the wheels. And so on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the walls get moved, and we have little pieces of tape on the floor so we get them back in the right spot. So we're able to have yoga safely here. We mask ourselves also, but we can get way spread out and remove our masks. So that's the versatility of the Iowa Quilt Museum.
Yeah, and what a beautiful surrounding to do yoga in, too.
Oh, it is. I try to get in a different spot every time.
All
Any
right.
other questions?
Yeah, there are a couple other questions. Sujata, one of the questions maybe you could type in while I'm asking Anne this question is that they asked about your book, if you could type in the title of your book.
All right. Okay.
So Anne, I think that you kind of answered these questions already, but they specifically asked, talk about your technique. Are the edges raw, and do you hand sew or machine sew?
It's all machine sewn, no raw edges. It's all quilt as you go, where basically I take one thin piece of fabric, sew it adjacent to the next one, and keep building like that.
Okay. And then what was the other part of that? Oops, we lost the chat here.
Oh, that's because I screen shared because someone asked to see the quilts again.
Yeah, that's good. Let me just see if I can find this other. Oh, are the edges raw? Okay, so you answered that. Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
So here's, okay. I didn't think I did that. So I'm trying to respond to let us see the other quilt. This is Sujata's quilt. I just am not good at.
I'm still really fascinated, Sujata, by the fact that this is from the outside in.
This is, yeah, it's amazing. And you know, the best part about this way of quilting, it really keeps you in the moment because you really don't know what the end result is going to be. You know, unlike we make a quilt top or you have a pattern or an idea and you are working towards that idea on a design wall or design floor, whatever space you have. But this one, you are really in the moment. You're picking one little scrap that goes with the first one that you put down. So you're only thinking of that one next to that previous one. You cannot envision the whole picture. You may even have a thought that, okay, this is what I want to do. But by the time you get done, I simply describe this as the life that we live, you know, because you start working from outside, and you've stitched on top of it already, you can't really undo anything. So it's like you can't visit last month or the year before or the year before. Life is always about moving forward. And when you really finish it, you really see that unless I had gone through those outside strips, I wouldn't have been here. And that to me is become the most important focus on quilting this way. So I don't think I'll ever stop, or at least not anytime soon.
Now bear with me, you're going to get a quick little view of other quilts while I find.
So I'll mention quickly that this exhibition will be traveling in 2022 spring to the New England Quilt Museum. I was really delighted that they expressed interest, and most of the quilts, not every single quilt, but then there will be some exciting new quilts too in the exhibition to take the place of those that aren't going to be able to travel. So something to look forward to if you haven't been able to get to the Quilt Museum, but it's still up and through March 21st. So, and there's Anne's quilt.
There's Red Sun again. I think if I were using my own computer, I might do a better job of this. I apologize. So yes, there it is. And it's getting a little close to, to one here in South Central Iowa. So I would like to invite any of you to visit the Iowa Quilt Museum website. It's iowaquiltmuseum.org. You know, these programs have been so popular. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people visit us this way, which is, you know, one of those little silver lining of this terrible time. But we hope that you will come and visit us in person. You can visit our website to find what the current exhibit is. You can get on our mailing list. Megan publishes a newsletter called Iowa Quiltscape that spotlights any quilt goings on here in Iowa. You would also know when our exhibits are changing so that you can plan a visit. You can shop in our gift shop. We have a lot of unique things there. You can access past programs, and also you can make a donation. But another great thing, I've given you kind of a sneak preview of as I was searching for pictures, but Megan and our board member, our board chair, Randall Parkin, made a wonderful virtual tour that is $6. You can order it through the website, and $6 is what we charge for I'm going to stop your.
We just got 2 comments from people saying how much they enjoyed the virtual tours.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's beautifully done. You learn about the museum, and I watched it, and it's well worth the $6 that it costs. And it does help our museum too, because traffic is pretty low. But we hope that you will come in person. You can also become a member. And if you're a member, you can come that year as many times as you wish. Also our next program, which is March 9th, is the guests are, and Megan will be back facilitating it, but it will be my daughter, Mary Fonz, who many of you know as editor-in-chief of Quilt Folk magazine, and Jody Sanders, who is the editor of American Patchwork and Quilting. And they're going to talk about what it's like to publish a magazine, and particularly during a pandemic. So that's going to be a great program on Tuesday, March 9th. Hello, Rod Kirikoff. Thanks for popping in.
Oh.
I was going to ask you to stop your video, but I just can't bring myself to do that. So you're muted, Rod.
You want to stop the video?
Well, we did ask participant to stop video, but it's so nice to see
Okay.
you. It gives us an opportunity to thank you again for being so generous with quilts for Lindsay's exhibit.
My pleasure. It's such a great exhibit. It was fun to have the talk a couple of weeks ago, and nice to see you, Mary.
Yeah.
Mary Ann.
Mary Ann.
Yeah.
Mary Ann.
I mean, you get in trouble if your name is Mary Ann and you name your child Mary. So there have been a lot of confusion over. Yeah, well, like when
I've been on the phone a lot with Mary. So
Yes.
okay, I will sign off. I'm not here.
Okay.
I am here though.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, Rod.
Would you like to make some closing remarks today?
Me? Well,
Yeah.
I would just say it's one of the things I've so appreciated everyone who's attended these talks. It's just been fantastic. And I have learned so much getting a chance to talk to the artists, because I did not get to meet these people, these extremely talented people before. So this is the first time I've gotten to meet Sujata and Anne as well. And it's just been a pleasure. And I'm so excited that we'll be together again in spring in New England. So
Right. And I think, it's so great to have these conversations. Just like you say, under normal circumstances, we don't have the funds to bring you here to Iowa. We wish we did. But now I think any of us that cross paths with either of you in the future, we've had this conversation and we're like, hey, I think I know you. And when we can, as someone said, when we can roam freely again someday.
I have a question regarding that. Do you think you will continue this regardless of when the world opens up and all that? Because this has been really very educational and eye-opening. So
we just discussed that at a recent exhibition committee meeting. And I think everyone, no matter what area you're in, globally is asking that. They've seen the advantages of virtual because people can participate that couldn't otherwise. A class that we offered on Saturday had 100 participants in it.
Right.
So I think all of us will be figuring that out, and we'll have to find out if people, once they can go and do things again,
Mhm.
will
Mhm.
they come? Maybe it won't be 100, won't be 500, but so it's 50. So,
Yeah.
so I don't have a straight answer for that, but
Yeah.
it certainly forced us, like everyone, to do things we should have been doing in the first place, which is have programs like this. So,
Yeah.
so I think the answer is yes, in
Yeah.
some fashion, and we will have to just make it up as we go, just like we've been doing everything for the past year.
Right. Yeah. I get requests from people that, the classes should continue, because people from Australia or England or whatever, unless they were online, they would say that I would have never been able to attend your classes. And so I think for me, I was not going to be in Iowa anytime soon. So this actually has been wonderful.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
I think those of you that earn a living teaching will
Right.
probably go out on the road again and do classes in
Mhm.
person, and you have a new revenue stream as the virtual classes that you think like, oh, for November, I'm only going
Right.
to teach online so I can be at home. So I think
Exactly.
that's the way. And I know Anne can relate, because when you're making a living, if you can find another revenue stream and dip your line in that stream, it's a great thing to do.
Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you both so much. It was a pleasure to meet
Well,
you.
thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Anne. Thank
And
you,
thank-
Sujata.
Thank
And
you.
everyone
Thank
who
you.
attended.
Thanks.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.